I'm Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I'm going to work on the setting triangles in the Broken Star quilt. And I'm going to use this template, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this template to make a feather design within that triangle. Okay, I made this template out of just a piece of cardstock, and I traced this design and then mirror imaged it, and I cut it out. Now this is one of my own designs from my filigree collection, and I just decided to turn it into a feather design for this triangle. And I've used this in other quilts before, so it's not brand new to me, but it is made for a triangle. And here I have some 1/4 inch marks that I can use to line up with the piecing if I want to, or if I need to pull it out further, then I can. And with this design, I'm going to put it fairly close to the piecing lines here, and then I'm just going to trace it with my chalk pencil. And you can transfer this any way you want to, just any design you have. Just cut it out in something fairly firm like cardstock. I think this is 90-pound cardstock. It's not real heavy cardstock. It's easy enough to cut out. And you can laminate this if you want to make it last a little bit longer, or you can actually use 2 layers of cardstock. And there we go. Now I can see my design, and I'm not going to worry about staying exactly on the line while I'm quilting. I'm going to get as close to it as I can, but I found with myself, if I go real slow and try to stay on these lines, the quilting doesn't look as smooth as if I just get in there and just quilt on it at my regular speed. But what I want to do is I want to put a teardrop right here and one right here, and then I'm going to get my ruler, and I'm going to draw a parallel line up here to the center of the triangle. And this is a guideline for where my feathers are going to end. And the feathers are going to go in like this. And then they're going to come around here like this. I want to probably be a little bit smaller. And I'm not going to follow these lines either. This is just kind of a guide for me so that I can see, get an idea of how to space these feathers, how many will fit in. And I do want to make these to come out and fill as much space as I can. And since these are hand-guided, they will all look different. But there's half of it, and then the other half will be just the reverse of that. So we'll just go in and fill these in. And the only thing I'm going to really work at is having the same number of feathers over here as I do over here. And that is just an aesthetic type thing. It just makes it look better. And that's where you will notice a difference in your quilting, is if you have, like if I have 6 feathers here. If I had 5 on this side and 6 on this side, you would notice that. But if they're exactly across from each other, then you're not going to notice it. Now, the number of feathers I have over here and I have over here, it isn't going to matter if they're the same, because they're not butted up against each other, so you're really not going to see that. So I'm not going to worry about that. This isn't a competition quilt. This is for my daughter, and she definitely isn't going to care. And so that's how I'm going to do that. And there we have a nice little feather design. So I will quilt that in and show you how that goes.
In this triangle, I have the feather all drawn out, and I'm not going to use that as, I'm going to use this drawing as a guideline. I'm not going to try and follow exactly right on top of that because this will still be freehand, and I may have a few more or a few less feathers than what I have drawn in here. But I'm starting with that bottom teardrop, and then I'm quilting in that spine. That's the template that I had traced on earlier in the video. And I'm going to try and make this with quilt this with as few starts and stops as I can. It's not possible to, well, it is possible to do it all without a stop and start, but it will look neater if I do stop at one point. So I'm going to follow into the center and do those center feathers, and these are the ones that I like to have the same number of feathers on each side. But that's not really necessary because this is hand guided. This isn't computerized. So if you had a computerized pattern, yeah, that will give you the exact number of feathers that you want, but this is hand guided, so you have to kind of allow for the human element there. But I am getting in the same number of feathers on each side, and then I'm going to trace the back of that one feather down so that I can get that little feather there on that one side. Now this is where I need to break the thread and move the needle to a different position. And this black fabric just picks up every piece of lint that's floating around, so I'm picking off pieces of lint as I go. Now on the outside of the feathers, it doesn't matter as much as to how many feathers you have there because they're not lining up with another row of feathers. So if you have more on one side than the other, you're not going to notice that when you're looking at the block unless you're actually looking for that, then you will notice it. But once again, this is hand guided, this isn't computerized, so it isn't going to be absolutely perfect. So this side is almost done, and I'm following pretty closely to what is drawn on there on this side. Now on the other side, I think I throw in an extra feather from what I do have drawn on the quilt. So I'm going to break my thread and move over to the other side and then quilt the feathers over here. And these are the regular formal feathers, the type that you trace over the top of every other feather. You can use any kind of feather in here that you like. You can do the curly feather, you can do the swirled feather, you can put little spines in those feathers. There's lots of different things that you can do when you're quilting feathers. And I think this is, yeah, this is where I throw in an extra one. I put in two smaller ones instead of one large one. And each one of my triangles looks a little bit different. They're not all the same because this is, once again, this is hand guided. So that feather is done, and that really didn't take very long. I chose to do the black thread in the background so that it doesn't detract from the star piecing. And I also did that in those blocks that are in the corners of the quilt, and I'll show you that on another video. But there's that completed feather, and I think it looks real nice.
Okay, now I'm getting ready to work on these black background squares, and I decided to do a feather wreath, and I have the center marked with some chalk, and then I have a center ring, and that is where the tips of my inner feathers are going to end. So I'm going to move around to the front of the machine and start quilting this feather. And I'm still using the black thread, and I'll be using a circle template for the spine of the feather.
Now the circle template that I'm using, it has a star cut out. This is from Linda Taylor's template collection. And I have a piece of tape on this template that shows me where the center is. So I use that to line up with the cross marks that I already have drawn on the quilt block there. So once again, this is black thread, and this will just show the texture of the quilting. You won't see the thread as much in this block. It's the same as when you're quilting with white thread on white fabric. You just see the texture of the quilting. You don't see the actual thread, which was my goal for this quilt. So I'm just carefully tracing around this template and just crossing over at the ends to kind of secure my starting point. And then I'm going to start with the feathers in the center. And these are the formal feathers again, and nothing real fancy. I'm not adding anything extra to it. There's no swirls, there's no spines, it's just the feather. And I am in stitch regulated mode right here. Now I like to switch in and out of stitch regulated to manual mode. I believe this was the first feather wreath that I had done in this quilt, so I had it on manual mode to help me get the feel of the block and the feather. And on the other ones, I believe I had turned off the stitch regulator and just did it in manual mode. It goes a little bit faster, and I think the feathers look a little smoother. Now I'm going to follow that spine, the back of that feather down to the spine, and then do the feathers on the outside. Now these aren't going to be in a circle. These are going to reach out into the corners of the block to help fill extra space. And you can do your feathers, however you like. I've done them both ways. I've done it where I just did it in a circle to make a true wreath, and then I've done them like this quite a few times. And this is the pattern that I'll use if I'm wanting to fill space all in one pattern and not have to throw in an additional pattern to fill in the corners. So you can see here, you can see the quilting pretty well. It's not invisible. The lighting is good enough that you can actually see the texture that the quilting is creating. And you'll notice that there seems to be a little bit of fullness in that block, but that's just because there is some quilting done in that border above it, and that kind of draws in the fabric as you're quilting. You probably know that it draws in fabric, and so what is below your quilting is going to be wider than what you have just quilted. So that can create a look of fullness in the blocks that are not quilted yet, and that's one of the reasons why I go around and I stabilize each block before I do my detail quilting, because that helps prevent even more fullness that could be created in the quilt. So this feather is done, and now I have to work on that center, because that is a 4-inch center there, so that's a lot of spacing, and I don't want to leave that unquilted. So I decided to just do a swirl in there. And when you have a 4-inch circle, there's lots of different things that you can put in there. You can find a motif in your patterns in the piecing of your quilt and copy that, or just use any kind of filler that you like. You could use pebbles, cross hatching, stippling. I just chose to do a swirl because I knew that would be fast. And it gives a little extra motion to that feather. And you notice that I did just quilt over all those thread tails there. They don't usually get caught up in the hopping foot, so don't worry about that. It's just a matter of pulling them out when I get done with the quilting. And then I'll just brush off the chalk marks, and I have a little lint brush there that I use. And then here's the finished feather. I put some extra lighting on that so you can see it better. And that's how I did the rest of the background of this quilt. All that is there is 4 black squares, and there's 8 triangles, and then that's all the background of that quilt. So I hope you got some ideas from this video, and I thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my newest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.